For over 20 years, a file labeled Cold Case, Emily Hartman, sat in a locked cabinet inside the Springfield Police Department. Inside it, a photo of a smiling 9-year-old, a pink backpack, and one torn strip of fabric. In 1998, Emily vanished walking home from school. The entire town searched. Then the years moved on, and her story faded from the headlines. But in 2018, that forgotten strip of cloth was tested again, and what it revealed would shock even veteran detectives. The man responsible had been hiding in plain sight all along. Where are you watching from tonight? Comment your city, and subscribe, because every week we uncover the stories time tried to bury. There was nothing unusual about that chilly Thursday morning in Springfield, Missouri. The world seemed ordinary, quiet, and safe, just the way families liked it in the fall of 1998. Inside the modest Hartman apartment, the scent of cocoa lingered as sunlight crept across the linoleum floor. Emily Hartman, only 9, was already a blur of golden hair and boundless energy. She slung her purple winter coat around her shoulders, the one she wore every day, as if it were a suit of armor against the cold and the ordinary, and nearly forgot her cocoa cooling on the kitchen table. The clock ticked towards 7:30 as she hurried through the morning routine. Her mother, Susan, called after her, but Emily was already halfway out the door, clutching her backpack and a crumpled flyer for the upcoming Christmas fair. She leapt over a puddle at the curb, boots splashing, grinning up at the school bus idling with a gentle rumble. A friendly wave to the driver, and she disappeared inside, joining the familiar chaos of laughter and backpacks thumping against seatbacks. At school, Emily's laughter blended with the chatter of her classmates. She showed the Christmas fair flyer to anyone who would look, her excitement contagious. The hours slipped by with math lessons and spelling tests, lunch in the cafeteria, and whispers of holiday plans. To her, the world was full of possibility each day. A small adventure in a city that felt too small to ever hold real danger. The school day ended as it always did. Children racing toward the buses, teachers calling reminders over the noise. Emily found her usual seat near the window, pressed her face to the cold glass, and watched the neighborhoods roll past as the bus made its slow, familiar journey toward home. The sun was sinking, casting long shadows across lawns and leafless trees. She clutched her flyer tighter, picturing her mom's proud smile when she shared the news. At 3:45 p.m., the bus hissed to a stop near East Chestnut Expressway. Emily was the last to step off, as she often was, waving to the driver who'd watched her grow a little taller each semester. She started her short walk down the sidewalk, her purple coat a bright spot against the dull autumn landscape. The afternoon was still and uneventful. Only the distant bark of a dog and the rattle of wind in the trees to keep her company. She never made it home. Somewhere, between the curb and her front door, Emily vanished, gone in the time it took for a mother to finish a phone call, for a neighbor to glance out a window, for a car to drive by and keep going. The flyer fluttered in her hand. Her boots left small prints on the patchy grass, and the purple coat, so familiar to everyone in the neighborhood, disappeared without a trace. When Susan Hartman glanced at the clock later that afternoon, she expected the usual routine. Emily bursting through the door, cheeks red from the cold, eager to share her day. But the hours stretched longer and quieter than usual. At first, Susan told herself not to worry. Maybe the bus was late. Maybe Emily had stopped at a friend's apartment. Maybe. But the cocoa sat untouched on the kitchen table, cooling in the fading light. And outside, the sky darkened, pressing down on the city with the weight of something unspoken. The normalcy of the day shattered like glass, replaced by an ache of dread that would never truly fade. It was just an ordinary day. Until it wasn't. What really happened that afternoon? That question would haunt a city a family, and everyone who remembered the little girl in the purple coat who never came home. Springfield, Missouri, in the late 1990s, was a city wrapped in the gentle routines of Midwestern life. Days drifted by, with the comforting sound of church bells ringing each Sunday, the steady rhythm of neighbors greeting each other from across tidy lawns, and the laughter of children racing down cracked sidewalks on bicycles too big for their legs. Life felt predictable, safe even, in a world that sometimes forgot what danger looked like. In a modest apartment near Doling Park, Emily Hartman's family tried to blend into this tapestry of ordinary. Susan Hartman, her mother, worked long hours as an accountant, her life governed by numbers, receipts, and the click of her calculator. She was soft-spoken and diligent, fiercely protective of her only child, and haunted by the constant worry of making ends meet. Emily's stepfather, Paul Becker, brought a different energy to the home. A former Navy man, broad-shouldered and quiet, still carrying the discipline and cautious eyes of someone who'd seen too much of the world, he did his best to fill the role of a father, fixing broken faucets, packing Emily's lunches, and driving her to doctor's appointments when Susan's schedule didn't allow. Despite the patchwork of their small family, there was warmth in their routines. On weekends, Emily and Paul would walk to Doling Park, tossing breadcrumbs to ducks and watching stray cats prowl along the creek. Emily had a way of seeing the world that was all her own, a sense of curiosity that pulled her toward people and places most adults ignored. She'd stop and chat with the elderly neighbors tending their roses, or wave at the mail carrier, asking 100 questions about where letters went and how far they traveled. Her mother often said Emily could make friends with anyone, anywhere. And it was true. The little girl in the purple coat seemed to collect small kindnesses wherever she went. School was another patch in the quilt of Emily's life. Her teachers described her as talkative and bright, a child who delighted in stories and filled her notebooks with sketches of animals and imaginary places. She never shied away from sharing the details of her day, even if her stories sometimes wandered from fact to fantasy. There were hints, in retrospect, that she noticed more than most offhand comments about a nice man at the park who feeds stray cats, a mention of someone giving her a candy on the walk home. No one thought much of it at the time. The world seemed full of safe people, harmless strangers. The town of Springfield took comfort in its routines. People left their doors unlocked during the day. Neighbors knew each other's schedules. In the evenings, the lights of the apartments flickered on almost in unison, dinner plates clattering, and the hum of televisions drifting through open windows. It was a place where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. A city where the biggest excitement was a new ride opening at the county fair, or a record fish caught down at Fellows Lake. But in the background, unnoticed, small cracks formed in this sense of security. There were stories whispered among adults, rumors about burglaries, or a car seen driving too slowly past the playground. Once, a neighbor's garage was broken into, and for a week, everyone double-checked their locks. Still, these things felt distant, like thunder rolling far beyond the hills. For Emily's family, the days before her disappearance were ordinary. Susan woke early, made coffee, checked her accounts, and kissed Emily goodbye at the door. Paul left for his shift at the gas station, his uniform always pressed, his voice steady and reassuring. Emily, with her purple coat and boundless energy, moved through the world with trust and wonder, never imagining she was anything but safe. And Springfield, the city that prided itself on knowing all its children, all its stories, would soon be forced to reckon with the truth. Sometimes evil hides in the most ordinary places, and the most careful families can never prepare for the day when routine is shattered forever. The afternoon of November 12th began to unravel with a quiet, unnoticed shift. The kind of change that slips by while the world carries on with its routines, only to be recognized when it's too late to undo. At 3:45 p.m. as usual, the yellow school bus sighed to a stop on East Chestnut Expressway. Emily Hartman, bundled in her purple coat, stepped down onto the curb, her backpack bumping against her small frame, the Christmas Fair flyer clutched tightly in her hand. She waved goodbye to the bus driver, who watched her turn and start the short walk toward her apartment. A path she'd traveled so many times that her footsteps barely registered on the cracked sidewalk. At that moment, the world around Emily seemed perfectly still. The rustling leaves, the faded playground nearby, even the distant hum of traffic felt unremarkable. Across the street, a neighbor raked up brittle leaves, glancing up just long enough to see Emily's coat flashing purple in the late afternoon Sunday. No one noticed anything amiss. Not then. Hours slipped by. By 7 p.m., Susan Hartman's concern sharpened into fear. She stood by the window, watching darkness swallow the last light. The cocoa still untouched on the kitchen table. A silent reminder of a morning routine left unfinished. The phone calls began. First to the school, then to friends, then to the Springfield police. Each time, Susan's voice became a little more frantic, the polite concern on the other end of the line growing steadily more serious. Police arrived quickly. They questioned Susan, the neighbors, and finally the bus driver, who confirmed that Emily had been the last child to step off the bus that day. Nothing seemed out of place. No one had seen her stop to talk to a stranger. No car had pulled up along the curb. No dog had barked an alarm. It was as if she had simply dissolved into thin air in the space between the sidewalk and her front door. But not everyone's eyes had been turned away. Neighbor Ruth Jenkins, whose apartment overlooked the fence behind the Hartman home, reported seeing a man in a brown jacket and a knit cap standing near the back gate just before dusk. She hadn't thought much of it then. Men came and went along that path all the time, some cutting through the lot behind the apartments, others heading toward Doling Park. Still, the detail lodged in the investigators' minds, a potential lead in a case that had almost nothing to go on. That night, as a cold wind rattled the windows and set loose branches scraping across roofs, the police began their search. Flashlights cut through the darkness as officers fanned out along the wooded path that wound behind the parking lot. The neighborhood pulsed with anxiety. Front doors cracked open. Porch lights flickered on. Whispers traded over fences. At dawn, hope faded with the weak light that crept over the city. There, halfway down a wooded trail choked with fallen leaves and tangled weeds, a rookie officer found Emily's pink backpack. It lay abandoned just beyond the parking lot, straps twisted, one pocket half-zipped as if someone had been in a hurry. The Christmas Fair flyer was gone. The contents of the bag, some pencils, a folded worksheet, a half-eaten pack of gum were scattered across the dirt, as though spilled during a struggle or in someone's frantic rush to flee. The discovery was a shock that spread quickly through Springfield. For Emily's family, it marked the end of hope that she'd simply gotten lost or wandered to a friend's house. For the police, it was the first concrete sign that something terrible had happened. A child's possessions, left behind on a lonely path, speaking louder than any words. From that point on, the city's ordinary rhythms were broken. The bright spot of purple that used to walk those streets was gone, and in her place, a chilling silence settled over Springfield, hinting at the darkness that had crept into its heart. The discovery of Emily's pink backpack turned Springfield from a peaceful town into a place shrouded in unease. The news traveled faster than the autumn wind, passing from one household to another, leaving a trail of worry behind every closed door. By sunrise on November 13th, Emily's disappearance was no longer a family crisis, it was a community emergency. Almost immediately, the police organized a search, but it was the neighbors, teachers, and ordinary townsfolk who poured into the streets and woods with grim determination. People who had never spoken before joined hands, forming human chains through muddy ditches, overgrown fields, and dense thickets behind apartment buildings. Men in worn work boots combed creek beds. Mothers called Emily's name over and over into the chilly air, their voices cracking with hope and fear. The sound of walkie-talkies and shouts echoed through Doling Park, and along every street where a lost child might wander. Susan Hartman walked the same route from the bus stop to her front door countless times, retracing her daughter's final steps, as if by walking them she could turn back time. Each time, she called Emily's name a little softer, until her voice gave out. Paul Becker, silent and stone-faced, joined police and volunteers, his Navy training offering little comfort as he scanned the horizon for any sign of the little girl he had come to love as his own. Emily's classmates clung to their parents, some too young to understand what had really happened, others old enough to be afraid in ways they'd never been before. At schools, teachers gathered students in circles, speaking in hushed tones about safety and stranger danger, words that suddenly carried heavy meaning. For years, Springfield had prided itself on letting children roam free, but now every parent gripped their child's hand a little tighter. In just a few hours, the city changed. Posters with Emily's smiling face and the words, "Please bring her home," appeared on utility poles, in gas station windows, and taped to the doors of churches. Volunteers handed out flyers to passing cars and knocked on doors late into the night. The local radio ran updates every half hour. At night, porch lights stayed on as a silent signal, a beacon of hope for Emily, a warning to anyone watching. Fear spread quickly and quietly, seeping into everyday life. Parents stopped letting their kids walk home alone. Carpool lines at schools grew longer, winding down the block. The sidewalks that had once teemed with bikes and laughter grew empty after dusk. Even familiar faces looked different, as if a stranger might be lurking beneath every neighbor's smile. Suspicion replaced trust. People began to wonder about the man who worked late shifts, the teenager who cut through yards, the solitary figure seen walking near the fence behind the Hartman apartment. But no matter how many people joined the search or how many questions the police asked, Emily did not come home. Days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights, endless phone calls, and a creeping sense of dread. Volunteers grew weary, but they kept looking, checking abandoned sheds, crawling through culverts, and searching dumpsters. The police set up a hotline, logging every tip and rumor, but each lead seemed to end in disappointment. The city's heartbeat was now measured by the hope for a miracle and the ache of waiting for news that never came. Springfield was no longer safe. The cold November wind carried a new, unfamiliar chill. In every home, parents whispered prayers for their own children, and for Emily, the little girl in the purple coat who vanished, and whose absence had changed the town forever. The first 72 hours after Emily's disappearance were a blur of activity, a desperate flurry that blurred the lines between hope and dread. Springfield's police force, usually busy with petty thefts and traffic stops, now found itself at the center of a case that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Detectives worked late into the night, fueled by caffeine and the knowledge that every passing hour narrowed the chance of finding Emily safe. They started with what little they had: a timeline. At 3:45 p.m., Emily left the school bus, her purple coat flashing for a moment in the dull afternoon. Between 3:50 and 4:10, the world lost sight of her. It was a window barely wide enough for a crime, but large enough to swallow a life. Investigators canvassed the area, knocking on doors and re-interviewing the bus driver, who insisted Emily had been alone as she walked toward her building. No one could recall seeing her after that point, as if the world had simply closed around her and left nothing but questions in its wake. It didn't take long for suspicion to settle on those closest to the missing child. Paul Becker, the stepfather, was polite but clearly uncomfortable as detectives asked him to account for every minute of his day. He handed over his time card, proving he'd clocked in for his late shift at a gas station nearly 10 miles away. His alibi was airtight, but the scrutiny still lingered. Susan Hartman, pale and exhausted, endured the same relentless questions, her hands twisting a tissue until it tore. Outside, police officers followed the only real clue: Emily's pink backpack. A team combed the wooded path behind the old parking lot, searching for footprints, fibers, anything that might point to a direction or a suspect. Forensic technicians dusted the bag and its contents, working meticulously even as rain began to fall, threatening to erase what little evidence there might have been. On the zipper, a partial fingerprint was found, a tiny, nearly invisible mark that did not match anyone in the Hartman household, nor in the National Fingerprint Database. It was a ghost of a clue, tantalizing and frustrating in equal measure. Other leads trickled in, most of them thin or quickly ruled out. A boy in a neighboring building mentioned seeing a white van parked near the trail around 4:30, its license plate obscured by mud. The tip was enough to send police scouring traffic camera footage and local garages, but no van matching the description could be found. The man in the brown jacket and knit cap seen by Ruth Jenkins was sketched out in a police artist's rendering, then posted at every precinct in town, but no one came forward with a name. The image faded from headlines as the days slipped by. Despite the tireless effort, by the end of 2 weeks, the investigation stalled. Suspicions shifted from neighbors to strangers, from possible runaways to the terrifying reality of abduction. Springfield's police chief held somber press conferences, urging anyone with information to come forward, but the case was already growing cold. Leads dried up. The hotline rang less and less often. Even the community's energy waned, the search parties shrinking as the November weather turned harsh and unforgiving. For the Hartman family, the silence was the worst part. Each night, Susan stared at the empty bed, hoping for a sound on the stairs, a forgotten knock at the door. But there was only the whisper of wind against the windows and the knowledge that, somewhere out there, her daughter was lost and alone. The world kept moving, holidays approaching. Snow threatening to fall, but the Hartmans were frozen, suspended in the aftermath of a moment that had changed everything. And so, as another winter closed in, the file marked Emily Hartman was quietly set aside. The purple coat was now just a memory, the backpack locked away as evidence. Hope flickered, but mostly, it faded. The case, for now, had gone cold. Months turned into seasons. Autumn's fiery leaves gave way to the stillness of winter, then to the tentative green of spring, and on into the relentless heat of another Missouri summer. As the year closed and the world readied itself for a new millennium, Springfield's daily rhythms slowly returned to a fragile kind of normal. But for the Hartman family, and for anyone who had joined the search, nothing was ever truly the same. In quiet moments, people still wondered about the little girl in the purple coat, and parents kept their children closer than before. Almost a year after Emily Hartman vanished, hope flickered again, only to be smothered by grief. In October 1999, a hunter tracking deer in the tangled undergrowth of Mark Twain National Forest stumbled upon something that didn't belong among the roots and fallen leaves. There, tangled in the brush, was the small, unmistakable figure of a child. The purple coat was gone. But everyone in Springfield seemed to know before the news broke that Emily had finally been found. Law enforcement rushed to the scene. The forest floor became a silent theater of flashlights, evidence markers, and the slow, methodical movements of investigators. Emily's body was tied with nylon rope, her hands small and delicate even in death. The coroner's report revealed the terrible truth. She had been alive for days, restrained, denied food and warmth, left to die from exposure in the unforgiving wilderness. It was a cruelty that echoed through the community, transforming fear into heartbreak and outrage. The case, which had been fading from memory, exploded back into public consciousness. Candlelight vigils were held in parks and church basements, and memorial bouquets accumulated at the edge of the forest. Police renewed their efforts, but they faced a wall of silence. Forensic testing was still limited at the time, and the physical evidence yielded little beyond confirmation of what everyone already feared. Someone had taken Emily, hidden her far from home, and left her to perish alone. No DNA matched anyone in local or national databases. The partial fingerprint from Emily's backpack remained unclaimed, a taunting relic from the day she disappeared. Detectives chased rumors, drifters seen in town, unfamiliar faces at the fair, old acquaintances with questionable histories. Each lead unraveled into nothing. Months passed, then years. The Hartman family moved away, unable to bear the empty apartment and the constant reminders of loss. Susan Hartman stopped answering the phone, her grief too heavy to share. Paul Becker grew quieter, his Navy stoicism turning to isolation. Their lives became shadows of what they had been. Within the Springfield Sheriff's Office, the thick file marked "Cold Case Emily Hartman" was locked in a metal cabinet, gathering dust with other unsolved tragedies. New crimes drew attention, new families needed comfort, and the passage of time seemed to dull the pain, but it never erased it. For those who remembered Emily's shy smile, her energy, and her endless curiosity, the questions lingered like a stubborn ache. Who had done this? Why? Could it have been prevented? For nearly 20 years, the answers eluded everyone. Occasionally, a detective would pull out the file, staring at the faded photos, the hand-drawn maps, the lists of names and sightings. The cold case unit filed their hopes alongside the evidence. That one day, technology might offer what persistence could not, a way to lift the fog of the past, and to finally bring justice to a little girl whose story had haunted a city for a generation. In the meantime, life in Springfield continued, altered by tragedy, but unwilling to forget. The purple coat was now a legend, the wooded path a place to avoid. The Hartman case faded from headlines, but in the quiet hours of sleepless nights, it was never truly gone. Nearly 20 years passed before hope stirred again in Emily Hartman's cold case. By 2018, Springfield had changed. The city had grown. Faces and families had come and gone. But in the back rooms of the sheriff's office, the story of the missing girl in the purple coat still lingered like a ghost. The passage of time had dulled some memories, but it had also brought new tools, advancements in forensic science, that seemed almost like miracles to the detectives who had once worked the case with only notepads and fingerprints. Missouri's Cold Case Unit, now armed with technology barely imagined in the 1,990 seconds, decided to give Emily's case one more try. The evidence was carefully unpacked. The pink backpack, faded photographs, brittle reports. Most of the items had been combed over countless times, but one small piece, a torn strip of fabric from Emily's clothing, meticulously preserved for decades, held new promise. This time, analysts used touch DNA, an advanced technique able to extract genetic material from even the faintest traces of skin cells. The process was slow and painstaking. Weeks passed as lab technicians coaxed out a genetic profile, comparing it against every record in the vast and ever-expanding DNA databases. Then, quietly, the impossible happened. They found a match. The DNA belonged to Franklin Dewitt, a 61-year-old former Air Force mechanic with a criminal past. Dewitt was already serving a sentence in federal prison for child exploitation, his life a twisted tapestry of secrets and harm. Digging into Dewitt's background revealed chilling connections. At the time of Emily's disappearance, he had been living just 3 blocks away from the Hartman apartment complex. No one had suspected him back then. He'd been just another man in a working-class neighborhood, another shadow among many. He had never even been questioned. The realization sent a shockwave through the investigative team, a reminder that evil sometimes wore the most ordinary faces. The next step was interrogation. Authorities brought Dewitt into a stark, windowless room, hoping the years had worn down his resolve. For hours, he sat in silence, his expression unreadable. But the DNA evidence was unyielding. It placed him at the scene, tied him to the strip of fabric, and most damning of all, linked him to the fate of Emily Hartman. The detectives pressed on, reading the file aloud, reciting every detail of the case, determined not to let him escape into silence again. As word of the breakthrough spread, Springfield reeled once more. For some, it was a relief, a sense that the past was finally being faced, no matter how painful. For others, it reopened old wounds, the ache of those first desperate days returning in full force. Reporters called the Hartmans, now living far away, and old neighbors spoke in hushed voices about the man who had slipped through the cracks for so long. But for the investigators, the new lead brought resolve. Years of dead ends had made them careful and patient, unwilling to claim victory until the truth was fully revealed. They kept working, determined to build a case that would not collapse under the weight of time. It was science, slow, meticulous, and relentless, that had finally succeeded where hope and hard work alone had failed. And so, after decades of silence, the city prepared itself for answers, knowing that what came next would bring closure for some, but heartbreak for all. The DNA match shattered the long-held silence, bringing Franklin Dewitt out from the shadows into the harsh light of justice. The authorities moved swiftly, their case built on a foundation of technology that had not existed when Emily disappeared. Dewitt was transported under heavy guard to Missouri for questioning, his name now headline news, a specter of evil hiding for decades in plain sight. The community, the investigators, even strangers who only knew Emily's story from whispers and news clippings, watched as the case that had haunted Springfield finally approached its reckoning. Inside a sterile, windowless interrogation room, Dewitt faced a team of seasoned detectives. At first, he met their questions with a stony silence, hands folded, eyes downcast, seemingly immune to the passage of time or the weight of evidence. The room felt suspended between past and present, every tick of the clock echoing with the memory of a life lost. For hours, the detectives recounted every detail of Emily's case, the small kindnesses she was known for, the heartbreak her absence brought, the evidence that now linked him beyond any doubt. Still, Dewitt said nothing. Finally, when the silence became unbearable, he looked up with a faint, unsettling smile. His words were few but chilling, admitting in a flat tone that he just wanted to keep her for a while. With clinical detachment, Dewitt described how he had lured Emily away from her usual path with the promise of a kitten, offering a fantasy that was irresistible to a gentle, trusting child. He spoke of taking her to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Mark Twain National Forest, a place isolated enough for her cries to go unheard, her hope to fade with each passing night. When Emily began to cry and plead to go home, Dewitt abandoned her, locking the door behind him, leaving her alone to the darkness and the cold. He claimed that God would forgive him, his voice devoid of regret. The confession sent shockwaves through every listener. Investigators, hardened by years of grim cases, felt the heaviness of each word. For the Hartmans, the truth was as devastating as it was necessary. An answer to the question that had tormented them for so long, yet bringing no comfort. When the news broke, Springfield citizens mourned together, lighting candles in Emily's memory, gathering for vigils in churches and city parks, offering each other what little solace they could. In the summer of 2019, Franklin Dewitt stood trial for the kidnapping and murder of Emily Hartman. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, the confession, the timeline that finally made sense. The courtroom was packed with faces familiar and new, every seat filled by those seeking justice, closure, or simply an end to the long nightmare. Susan Hartman sat in the front row, her face pale but resolute as she listened to the verdict. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as the sentence was read. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. At last, after more than 2 decades, justice spoke. But the cost was enormous, and the wounds left behind would never fully heal. Emily's story became a testament not only to the resilience of a grieving family and the persistence of investigators, but to the power of truth, no matter how late it comes. As the courtroom emptied and the news faded from headlines, Springfield was left to mourn, to reflect, and to remember a town forever marked by the fate of a little girl in a purple coat, and the truth that would not remain hidden. The case of Emily Hartman became more than a story whispered in Springfield's neighborhoods. It grew into a cautionary tale, a shadow stretching far beyond Missouri. In the months following Dewitt's conviction, local news revisited every haunting detail, drawing parallels between Emily's fate and the chilling realities faced by countless families across America. It was a reminder that evil can strike anywhere, and that the wounds left by such loss never truly heal. Though the Hartman case had finally reached a form of resolution, the pain rippled outward, touching even those who'd never known Emily. The story awakened old fears in parents and teachers, prompting school assemblies about safety and new conversations between adults and children about trust, strangers, and danger. Law enforcement officers in small towns and big cities alike were reminded of the importance of diligence, of revisiting unsolved files, and of the relentless march of technology that might someday break even the coldest case. Yet for all its tragedy, Emily's story offered a sliver of hope, a testament to the perseverance of those who refused to let her memory be erased by time. Journalists dug deeper into other unsolved disappearances, shining light on cases that might otherwise have faded into archives. Activists rallied to push for better resources, for DNA kits to be processed more quickly, and for states to create stronger databases so that children like Emily would not be forgotten. The case's resolution helped inspire a new generation of detectives who understood that, with enough patience and science, even a decades-old crime could be solved. Beneath these efforts lay a real story, one rooted in fact and heartbreak. The disappearance of Emily Hartman was inspired by a true crime that had unfolded in Street Ann, Missouri, back in 1993. The real-life victim, Angie Hausman, was just 9 years old when she vanished on her way home from school. For days, the community searched, clinging to hope that she would be found safe. When her body was finally discovered, the circumstances mirrored those that would later haunt Springfield's fictional streets. A child snatched in daylight, hidden in the woods, left alone to perish. For years, Angie's case remained unsolved, her family left with nothing but unanswered questions and sorrow. It wasn't until the era of modern forensics, decades after her disappearance, that DNA finally identified her killer. Earl Webster Cox, a convicted sex offender, had lived unnoticed among neighbors, escaping suspicion for a generation. In 2019, after more than 25 years, Angie's family finally learned the truth, and the community that had mourned her so deeply found a kind of closure, though never true peace. The Hartman case, in its fictional retelling, became a vessel for all these feelings. The hope, the dread, the anger, and, ultimately, the resolution that sometimes justice is possible, even if it takes years to arrive. It reminded readers and listeners that the faces of lost children linger in the backgrounds of our lives, urging vigilance, compassion, and action. These stories are not just news, they are lived experiences for the families left behind and for the communities that must find ways to heal. Through Emily and through Angie, the lesson was painfully clear. The cost of forgetting is far too high. Each story echoed with the promise that, so long as someone remembered, so long as someone cared enough to keep searching, even the darkest mystery could one day find its answer. The story of Emily Hartman, like the true story that inspired it, lingers long after the headlines fade and the courtroom doors close. In Springfield, Life eventually returned to its everyday pace, but beneath the familiar routines was a quiet resolve, a promise that no child's memory would ever again be left to gather dust in a file cabinet. The impact of Emily's case rippled outwards, reshaping not only one community, but also the way countless parents, teachers, and law enforcement officers viewed the responsibility of protecting their children. For Susan Hartman, each day carried a different weight. There were moments, in the gentle hush of early morning, when she could almost believe Emily was just in the next room, ready to burst through the door with stories from school and dreams about the future. But reality always settled back in, heavy and cold. Susan found solace in small acts, lighting a candle by Emily's photograph, speaking to local groups about child safety, encouraging others never to take a single day for granted. Her grief would never fully heal, but she channeled it into purpose, determined that her daughter's story would stand as a warning and a call for compassion. Springfield, once defined by a sense of easy trust, had changed. The town now moved with a certain caution, eyes watchful on playgrounds, neighbors looking after each other's children as if they were their own. There were new traditions: 2 annual vigils for missing children, school programs that taught awareness without sowing fear, and, most importantly, a willingness to speak up when something felt wrong. The poster with Emily's face, once a desperate plea, became a lasting symbol of vigilance and community responsibility. The lessons learned from Emily's tragedy stretched far beyond Springfield's borders. In homes across the country, parents talked openly with their children about safety, reminding them that it was okay to say no, to trust their instincts, to never walk alone, even for a short distance. Schools and community centers posted reminders to report anything unusual, however small it seemed. Social workers and counselors created resources to help families cope with fear, uncertainty, and grief, while law enforcement officers pursued even the faintest leads, no matter how much time had passed. The greatest lesson was the simplest: silence can be dangerous, and speaking up saves lives. Every family, every neighbor, every community member shares a responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among them. Evil, as Emily's story proved, can hide in the most ordinary places. But so too can courage, hope, and the fierce determination to seek justice. By sharing these stories, by learning from them, people can build a future where fewer families know the pain that Susan Hartman carried, and more children make it safely home. As the years passed, Emily's name became a quiet rallying cry. Her story inspired countless others to act, to volunteer, to donate, to keep an eye out for the lost and the lonely. The police department created a cold case fund, driven by donations from neighbors and strangers moved by Emily's legacy. Investigators who had once worked her case used what they'd learned to bring answers to other families, to shine light into the darkest corners where truth and justice waited. Some wounds never heal, but the truth offers a kind of peace. For those who heard Emily's story, the call was clear: remember the lost, protect the living, and never give up on justice, no matter how long it takes. If you believe stories like Emily's deserve to be heard, share them. Talk to your children. Look out for your neighbors. Never stay silent in the face of violence or abuse. Somewhere out there, another family is waiting for the peace that only truth can bring. Your vigilance could be the difference. So let Emily Hartman's story echo beyond the last page, a quiet voice urging us all to do better, to hold each other close, and to never forget the children who should have grown up, but never had the chance.